Hey guys, Steinixos here. So, today in our power scaling fundamentals series, we're going to be talking about what I like to call the fiction problem. Now, this isn't some official term, just something I've coined to describe a common phenomenon I've noticed in power scaling discussions, where anytime people start debating feats or abilities in fiction, you can almost guarantee that someone will chime in saying, well, that can't actually happen because it is impossible in real life, or some variation of that sentiment. Like, this comes up all the time, with one of the most notorious examples being any debate around faster than light movement. Without fail, there's always at least one person who insists that faster than light travel is impossible according to real-world physics, so therefore, no character in fiction can actually be faster than light. Now, part of the reason this problem is so common is due to personal incredulity, that is, people struggling to wrap their heads around ideas that go beyond our reality. But it's also made worse by the influence of popular anime commentators, folks who aren't necessarily power scalers, but occasionally dabble in those kinds of discussions. And when they do, they sometimes end up spreading misconceptions, whether they mean to or not. Take for example 3skullJoe, a well-known Twitter One Piece theorist. In the past, he's argued that Kizaru is bound to the principles of Einstein's theory of relativity to support the claim that he can't be faster than light. Then you've got Grand Line Review, a hugely popular One Piece YouTuber, who, in his Devil Fruit Encyclopedia video covering the Light Fruit, casts doubt on whether Kizaru is even capable of moving at the speed of light at all. But here's the thing, this is fiction, and by definition, fiction is not real. It's not necessarily bound by the limitations of the real world. So saying something can't happen in fiction just because it defies reality is at best unimaginative, and at worst, straight up illiteracy when it comes to understanding the storytelling and genre of fiction. However, this issue comes up often enough that I figured it was worth making a dedicated video about it. That way, anytime it pops up in future discussions, I can just point people to this breakdown, rather than having to rehash the same points over and over again. So with that now understood, let us now get into some silly arguments. So the first class of arguments that usually comes up are real-world physics limits and real-world physics consequences arguments. So for example, in the real world that we live in, our current understanding of physics dictate that the speed of light is the fastest possible speed. Now, without getting into theoretical discussions about wormholes and certain quirks about the expansion of our universe, this limit of light speed is just a fundamental law of our real world universe that just cannot be overcome. As a matter of fact, in our real world, if an object were even to move at light speed, its mass would become infinite, and as a result, the energy required to move this object would also become infinite, which, as you would expect, would pose a significant burden to motion. Thus, in most theoretical discussion, the fastest possible speed you'll hear cited for things that are not light itself is something like 99.999% of the speed of light. So because of this fact about our real world, some people will then go on to make the claim that characters in fictional, that is non-real worlds like the One Piece world, can't actually move at or faster than light speed, since it is an impossible feat in our real world. Now, for the sake of argument, let us say that One Piece is the only work of fiction that you've ever watched or read in your entire life. Like, even with this, did you think that people in our real world could actually turn their bodies into lightning, or light, or magma, or ice, or crows? And did you think that people in the real world, with their bare hands, could literally grab space itself and tilt it? And did you think that people in the real world, again with their bare hands, could actually remove souls from other people and place them in inanimate objects like clouds, or fire, or the ground, giving these inanimate objects sentience and making them alive? Like, did your understanding of real world physics permit real world people like you and me to do these things? Like, obviously not. There are things that can happen in fictional worlds that cannot actually happen in our reality, and the consequences of these things don't have to follow what the consequence would be in reality. That is why it is called fiction. And light speed, as well as faster than light speeds, is a common trope in fictional worlds, and there are different consequences of this, which is dictated based on the author's preference. For example, the faster than light anime verse that tries its best to simulate the effects of faster than light travel travel, as theorized by real-world scientists, is Fire Force, with its main character Shinra. So Shinra in his Adola Burst is able to move at the speed of light, as well as accelerate faster than the speed of light, and he disintegrates into particles while doing it. And when he does this, he moves back in time, which corresponds to what would happen based on Einstein's theory of special relativity. Compare this to Adam. Yes, the first human in history, Adam. From the record of a Ragnarok manga, Adam is able to throw a punch that is not only faster than light, but rather it is faster than time itself. And he does not disintegrate, nor does he go back in time. And then of course we have Dispo from Dragon Ball Super, who is stated to be faster than light. And even outside of anime and manga, you have Song Jin-woo from the Korean web novel Solo Leveling, who was able to outpace Breath of Destruction, a light-based attack which is stated to move at the speed of light. And if you read comics, you know about characters like the Flash, who have so many faster than light speed feats, one of which is the fact that he can perceive events that last for less than a single attosecond. To put how fast this is into perspective, know that in 53 attoseconds, light travels less than 1,000th of the diameter of a single human hair. So again, even though fiction may have real-world elements like gravity or light, there is no necessity for any work of fiction to be entirely bounded by our real-world physics limitations or our real-world physics consequences. It is always up to the author to decide. Now, the next thing that usually comes up is the fact that in our real world, humans usually have certain set biological limits. So for example, the fastest conscious human reaction times are usually around 0.15 seconds, with the absolute fastest conscious human reaction time ever recorded being 0.101 seconds. As a matter of fact, anything faster than 0.09 seconds conscious reaction time is considered to be a false start for Olympic athletes awaiting a starting gun signal. Therefore, you'll have certain people saying that characters in One Piece like Kizaru are also bounded by biological limits, such as this real-world human perceptual limit. Now again, this is easily responded to by a reference in the prior section where I pointed out that in fiction, things can happen that are different from reality. However, I want to address this from another angle because this is an especially silly comment to levy against the One Piece world. Specifically because in the One Piece world, an integral part of the story is that there are numerous non-human species. Like for example, there is the Ming tribe, a race of anthropomorphic animals who can speak and who are naturally able to produce and control electricity. Even their babies are natural born fighters from birth. Then you have fishmen, a species that is 10 times stronger than an average human from birth and who can manipulate water as if it were a fabric with fishman jiu-jitsu. Then you have the Lunarians, a race having wings they can use to fly, they can naturally produce and manipulate fire, and they are so durable that they can survive in any natural environment. Then you have giants, who are generally over 20 meters tall and can grow to over 6 to 7 meters. And they are so strong that Harridan, for example, when faced against Matt Weiss, who increased his weight to over 10,000 metric tons, Harridan was able to receive the 10,000 metric tons Matt Weiss on his fist and punch this Matt Weiss up into the air. To put that into perspective, that is over 44 statues of liberties, which weigh 225 tons each, or over 909 male African elephants, the heaviest elephant in the world, weighing 11 tons each. Note, the heaviest recorded weight ever lifted by a real-world human is 2.84 metric tons. That is over 3,520 times less than the over 10,000 ton weight punched into the sky by Harridan. So how would it make any sense to put real-world biological limits on fictional species that are not even human in the first place and who have been demonstrated to be way above what any real-world human could possibly achieve? Like, a real-world human limits argument here is patently absurd. And don't forget, Harridan is complete fodder compared to certain human characters like Luffy who can easily one-shot him. But even if we were to completely ignore the existence of these non-human characters from the One Piece world and focus entirely on human characters, a lot of these humans are obviously not normal in the first place. For example, the tallest human in recorded history is Robert Wadlow, at 2.72 meters tall, who eventually died due to health complications related to the abnormal physiology associated with his height. But in the One Piece world, we routinely have normal, healthy humans who are above this height. So for example, Doflamingo is 3.05 meters tall, Matvis is 4.4 meters, Chinjao is 5.05 meters, Whitebeard is 6.66 meters, Pound is 7.31 meters, and Big Mom is 8.8 meters. Then, as we already mentioned, in our real world, 2.84 metric tons is the heaviest weight that has ever been lifted by a human in our recorded history. But here we have Mr. 4 casually swinging a bat that weighs over 4 metric tons. And again, here we have a pre-time skip Zoro also casually doing handstand push-ups with only his thumbs, while there's over 4 metric tons of weight plus the weight of the bar on his feet. And again, as we already mentioned, the fastest conscious human reaction time in our recorded history is 0.101 seconds, and anything faster than 0.09 seconds is basically accepted to be impossible. But here we have Sanji dodging a bullet at point blank range after the bullet had been fired. Now, I've already made a video where I cover the silly argument that people have where they say the guns in the One Piece world look old, therefore they are slow, so I won't address that here. But even if you were to assume the gun that Mont Blanc was using, bullet speed was 900 feet per second, which is actually slower than most old real-world flintlocks, which were usually at least 1000 feet per second, and assume that Sanji was actually 3 feet away from the gun, when we know for a fact that he was instead way closer, being directly in front of the gun. Even with this blatant underestimation, Sanji would still need to react in at least 1/300th of a second, which is 0.003 seconds. That is over 30 times faster than the 0.09 real-world human limit, which was basically accepted as impossible. And we've seen even Nami moving fast enough to deflect lightning, and Luffy running so fast that he set the ground on fire. And I mean, we've even seen things like a pre-time skip Usopp being slammed through a wall at a very high speed, followed by taking a hit from Mr. 4's 4-ton bat directly to the head, and he was not only still alive, but he was even still able to stand. And Sanji easily one-shotting and kicking a giant sea cow into the sky, which is 36 meters tall and weighs 16 tons. And a 10-year-old ace easily breaking a big thick tree with just 2 kicks. And I mean literally in the start of the series, at chapter 14, Zoro, while resting inside of a house, the house he was resting in was blasted with a buggy bomb, a cannonball explosive, which as Buggy said is able to destroy an entire small town in one shot, and Zoro emerged completely unharmed. Like, it could not be any more obvious that we're not dealing with normal real-world humans here. And remember, this is before taking into account things like devil fruits, which can have some pretty wild effects, and armament haki, which makes them stronger, and observation haki, which allows some people to even see into the future. So yet again, even if you literally knew absolutely nothing about fiction at all, by just watching or reading One Piece itself, you would realize that trying to attribute normal real-world human limits to the fictional characters of the One Piece world literally makes no sense. Now, it is definitely the case that there are people out there who try to apply real-world restrictions to fiction in bad faith. For example, you'll come across people who say that their favorite verse can have lightspeed characters, but for another verse, usually one they're less invested in, that kind of speed is impossible because of real-world physics. That kind of selective reasoning is obviously disingenuous, and in those cases, it's usually, but not always, just straight up malicious bias. However, I actually believe that the majority of cases where the fiction problem shows up, it's not coming from a place of malice or bad faith. It's usually just someone who, in their mind, thinks they're being reasonable. Think back to the 2 examples I mentioned earlier in the video. With Three Skull Joe, for instance, it's not that he believes faster than light travel is impossible in all fiction. He has clearly acknowledged that it exists in some fictional universes. He just doesn't believe it is a thing in One Piece specifically. And then there's Grand Line Review. He doesn't necessarily claim that Kizaru can't be lightspeed. It seems more like he's trying to protect the consistency of the story in his head, because if Kizaru is truly lightspeed, then that means he could zip across the entire world in the blink of an eye. And if that's the case, then you could imagine all sorts of narrative problems that could potentially raise, like why he hasn't just found the One Piece already. So you can see, most people making these arguments aren't trying to ruin the fun, they just think they're being logical. But even putting aside the specifics, like the size of the fictional world or the specific type of speed being talked about, the overall mindset is still kind of silly when you zoom out, because everyone already understands, whether consciously or not, that not everything in fiction has to make sense. Think about it. We all collectively accept the absurdity of no one recognizing Superman is Clark Kent just because he wears glasses. We don't question Thanos, destroyer of worlds, flying around in his own personal helicopter. Nobody blinks an eye at Brooke, a talking skeleton, who, keep in mind, is just bones and a soul, yet somehow still has hair because of strong follicles. Or those moments where a genius character suddenly does something unbelievably dumb, or when a massively strong fighter loses to someone way weaker with no good explanation whatsoever. All of that is called suspension of disbelief, though in some of those specific examples, like the dumb genius or the strong guy losing for no reason, it's more accurate to call it plot-induced stupidity. But even kids in preschool intuitively understand this. They know when to just go with the story. Not everything needs to be meticulously explained or accounted for. And going a bit deeper, fiction is not all or nothing. Some people treat it like this binary thing, where if a fictional world includes any real-world logic, then it has to follow it to the letter, or the reverse. If something in that world breaks real-world physics, then nothing in the fictional world should follow our rules. But that kind of thinking doesn't hold up under even basic scrutiny. Take One Piece, for example. Most regular humans in that world are biologically similar to us. They eat, breathe, bleed, and age like we do. But then you also have humans who grow to absurdly tall heights, or who belong to tribes like the long-leg or long-neck people, physiologies that would be completely impossible in reality. And weather, most of the time it behaves like our weather, sure. But then you have places where it rains candy, or where someone can literally store hurricane-level winds within a string. Gravity usually works like ours too, but then there's places like the random spring island in the New World, where people can seemingly just run on air, as well as Balloon Terminal, an island that is held up in the sky by a collection of small balloons. So no, just because a fictional world shares some basic traits with the real world doesn't mean it has to obey all the same limitations, especially at the extremes. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I would just like to reiterate, this kind of real-world restriction-based thinking is especially strange to try to apply to the One Piece world, because One Piece is a series that has, from the very beginning, been about pushing the limits of what's possible. Even from early on in the manga, we're told by an in-world One Piece physicist that if you can imagine something, then it's probably possible in the One Piece world. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that fictional worlds have no internal rules. Of course they do, but to claim that something is impossible in a fictional universe just because it doesn't align with our real-world science, or because it personally sounds unbelievable to you, is kind of missing the point. Fiction is meant to go beyond our reality. That's the whole idea. But anyway, that's the video, guys. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. But anyway, see you guys next time.